It was like I had this overwhelming kind of feeling that there was like some extremely powerful kind of like divine presence in the room with me. And I still had my eyes open. It wasn't like a breakthrough or anything. It was a relatively small dose, I guess, but I could just feel this like extremely strong presence in the room, like behind me, like I was sat on the sofa.
The following video does not glorify drug use, but instead it intends to promote harm reduction by discouraging the ignorant use of specific drugs, as well as harm elimination by discouraging certain people from using specific drugs altogether. There is no right or wrong way to consume these substances, but there are unsafe and safer ways, and what's more comfortable for one person may be more dangerous for another. Before watching this video, please understand that psychedelic experiences may not be entirely predictable, but that doesn't mean that bad trips and good trips are random. Rather, it means psychedelic experiences are influenced by factors such as the individual's given setting, and dosage at that specific point in their life. Therefore, you will not experience what these people have experienced, but you could potentially experience something similar. However, these are random people, so please do not make decisions based on what they say without your own due diligence. And also, take note, once again, that these substances affect everyone differently, especially those with pre-existing mental conditions.
It feels like ever since I started doing DMT, I have had a lot of really strange, crazy experiences that have not just during the DMT, but they kind of bleed into just like my life in general. Like I remember probably the first crazy DMT experience I had. It would have been probably like a year ago, or like a little less than a year ago. I was struggling with kind of anxiety and depression back then because of the whole coronavirus thing and just being locked inside a lot. And I was in kind of like a dark place, but I got my hands on these DMT vape cards and I was just kind of experimenting with them, just doing a little bit, like not going like super crazy hardcore, but I was just kind of like doing it every now and then. And at first it was like crazy, like generic kind of crazy visuals and a little bit of interactions with like entities, but nothing out of this world. But one of the nights I was doing acid, and probably like 5 or 6 hours into the acid, I decided to do some DMT as well. And I was sat in my living room and I did the DMT, and it was completely different from all the other times. It was like I had this overwhelming kind of feeling that there was like some extremely powerful kind of like divine presence in the room with me. And I still had my eyes open. It wasn't like a breakthrough or anything. It was a relatively small dose, I guess, but I could just feel this like extremely strong presence in the room, like behind me, like I was sat on the sofa. And just the feeling of like being in the presence of it was kind of like bringing me to tears, kind of like it was like extremely overwhelming. Whatever it was, it felt like it was behind me. And it felt like it kind of like, it was almost like if someone was stood behind you and they put their like hands on your head, like they were inspecting the back of your head. And it did that, and my head started moving around on its own kind of thing. Like it moved down and it was like kind of moving side to side, like there was something inspecting my head from behind me. And obviously I was just like fucking gobsmacked, like it was extremely powerful. And ever since that experience, it's kind of like there's been a lot of really weird coincidences in my life. Kind of like it's almost like after that my entire perspective of the world changed, and my anxiety and my depression kind of like dissolved. And I started randomly coming across videos on YouTube about kind of like the ego and like the false self and the true self and kind of all this like spiritual kind of shit, just like coincidentally. And I started learning about, you know, where all this like anxiety and depression, negative thinking comes from. And it really felt like whatever that entity was kind of like took like I had blinders on, and that entity took the blinders off, and I could see the world for what it truly was, like without the filter of the ego making me feel like everything was shit. And I could see that the world was actually like beautiful and like amazing. And I don't know, ever since then, it's like my entire personality is like flipped. Like I'm so positive now. Like I was so negative back then, and now I used to always just like have like suicidal tendencies. I'd be like, why am I here? Like, what is the point? And now I wake up and it's just like everything's fucking incredible, and I'm just like so happy I'm here. And it's like I owe my life to whatever that fucking thing was, because ever since that day, it's just like, yeah, it's like bliss. It's amazing. And that's kind of why I love DMT so much now. So yeah, that was the first crazy experience I had.
Is there any other long-term effects that were a result of that experience?
Well, mine, like all of my interests have completely changed since then. It's like I'm a completely different person, honestly. Like, I'm nothing like how I was before that experience now. I changed for the better for sure.
And you already kind of talked about this, but I guess is there anything else you can say as far as well, why do you think you experienced that change in your life? Or what do you think caused that outcome?
Well, you could look at it from different perspectives. Like, I am kind of spiritually leaning now. Like, I used to be an atheist agnostic, but I do kind of tend to be a kind of spiritual now. But you could look at it from kind of like a rational point of view, where it's kind of like just the realization of like what your consciousness is capable of, and like the realization that all the problems that you thought was so important are just like nothing compared to what reality is. Like, you do DMT and it shows you these things that are just like out of this world, like so incredible, and it just puts everything into perspective, where it's like your petty little human problems are just kind of like pointless. And I think there's that aspect to it as well, for sure. Just like how powerful the human mind is. And yeah, I do feel like DMT tends to be kind of similar to Mandy, or similar to MDMA, where it's kind of like bliss and love kind of vibes. So it just kind of tend to drag you in that direction, or at least it did for me personally. I mean, so after that happened, I started coming across all these videos about kind of like the ego and like spirituality, like the false self, the true self, just consciousness. Like, I started getting really interested in consciousness, because it's like, why is consciousness? Why is my mind capable of doing these things? People think like, oh yeah, DMT is crazy, but it's not the DMT that's crazy. It's your mind which is crazy. Like, the DMT just kind of allows your mind to go fucking ape shit and like show you these things that it was always capable of doing. It's just usually you don't see it. So it's kind of like I was seeing this shit and I was like why is the human mind capable of doing this stuff? So I kind of went down this rabbit hole, and it kind of colored all of my other experiences after that. So I remember I had another acid trip after that DMT experience. And I was kind of getting into like meditation and contemplation and stuff, trying to like go deeper into my mind to see like how far it goes. And I remember I was like in my room kind of like watching a video about consciousness and such while tripping on my acid. And it was kind of a deep video about the nature of reality and shit. And as I was watching it, it felt like I could feel my ego dissolving, and it felt like I could kind of see myself from like a perspective, like from outside of me, kind of like outside of my ego. I could see myself, kind of thing. It's really fucking hard to describe, but it felt like I was kind of like looking at myself from the perspective of kind of like a higher self, kind of looking down at me, kind of thing. And it felt like it was kind of giving me the option to kind of go through an ego death, but I pussed it out because I'm kind of like anxious person. And I was thinking, oh, like, oh, I don't know, what about my friends? What about my mum? Yeah. So it felt like it was kind of giving me the option to like say, like, to leave this ego behind and kind of see what it's like without the ego, kind of thing. But I pussed it out, but it's still kind of like, it was like I was communicating with it in a way. It was like as me, as James, I was communicating with this thing that like lives behind James, lives behind my ego. And I was asking it stuff. I was like, well, can you at least like show me a little bit of what it's like? And when I asked it that, it's like my entire body was just like extreme euphoria, just like washed through my whole body. And I just had the most intense visuals ever, like the whole room like dissolving from me like asking it. And it was just like pure bliss kind of thing. But I do kind of regret pussing out of that. I still would love to have an ego death experience. I still haven't had one, but that's kind of why I'm interested in mushrooms as well. But yeah, that experience was kind of crazy, because I don't usually interact with like other kind of entities on acid or whatever. That's kind of like rare for acid. That was the only time that happened.
Is there much you can say in regards to how the experience you just described? Is there much you can say how that's affected you long term? Or
Well, it was kind of jarring at the time, because it really felt super like, it really felt like there was always this kind of, I don't want to say entity, because it didn't feel like that, but because it was acid, it wasn't DMT, it was acid. So, but it felt like there was always kind of like this higher dimension, kind of like behind normal waking life, like behind normal consciousness. There was always kind of like this thing that exists like above or like behind like reality behind like the normal experience, the normal mind. And at the time, it felt like so realistic. It was like I unplugged from this body and I was like that thing. So it was kind of jarring to think that is that thing always there? Because like I've never had it on acid before. Like I think that was kind of rare for acid. So after that, I was kind of like wondering like what the fuck was that? Like is that always there? Like can I like access it again? Like I don't know. It was kind of rare for acid. But I feel like when you do DMT, it kind of like affects other trips. Like you can do DMT a few times, and then if you do acid, it kind of like colors the experience. Where the DMT kind of bleeds into like other psychedelics and makes them feel more DMT, which is quite interesting.
Before that, this is gonna be a little bit of a weird question, but I guess I'm just curious to see if it goes anywhere. Before that experience, what did you perceive as you or yourself?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is a weird question.
Yeah.
Because this is new to me. Like I used to be just kind of atheist agnostic. Like I thought, what you see is what you get. I never used to be into like the whole fucking, the ego and the soul and all this shit. Like this is quite new to me, so I'm still kind of like trying to wrap my head around it. And I think just for the fact I've been watching so many videos and kind of researching it, like reading like loads of books about it, probably impacted it to an extent. I'm still not really sure, to be fair. Because you know what it's like when you're tripping anyway, it's so fucking vague and like hard to describe, like it feels so, like at the time it feels like the most real thing in the universe, but then you fucking come back to normal sober state and it's like, you can't really relate to it. So it's like, even though at the time, but I don't know, it felt like, I don't know if it was kind of, you could say that it was like kind of like the subconscious, right? Whereas like my conscious mind is like the normal mind, and then it was like the subconscious where you have all these fucking, they say the subconscious like 90% of your mind. Because it did feel like in that time, but it was like multiple things, and they were all kind of like egging me on to kind of like go deeper. And like, I don't know, you hear a lot about it, like in spirituality, about like kind of spirit guides and like angels and shit. And it does kind of feel like that, where it just feels like there's other things kind of like always like around you or like watching you or like guiding you. And you could say it's just like the subconscious or like the other aspects of yourself. But that's kind of what it felt like, I guess.
In the past, or I guess even now, do you identify with your own thoughts? Like, do you see when you think, do you and like you hear that voice in your head, or you see your own thoughts? Do you identify as those thoughts?
I used to. I used to until that initial DMT experience I told you about with a weird entity, like moving my head around. Like before that, I thought I was my thoughts, and that's kind of why I had social anxiety and depression, because my thoughts would always be, fucking bullying me, saying kind of like, oh, everyone fucking hates you, everyone thinks you're a fucking loser and shit. And I just kind of assumed that those thoughts were me. And it wasn't until that DMT experience that I realized that, oh, wait, that voice in my head isn't me. And now I don't associate with the thoughts anymore. And I've been meditating a lot as well, which helps. But yeah, before that, I was definitely like 100% associated with my thoughts, yeah.